welcome to My Security TV and our Tech and Sec Weekly. My name is Chris Cubbage. I'm the Executive Editor with My Security Media, and this is our Tuesday afternoon episode. We're going to be joined by the Chief Executive Officer of the Australian Security Industry Association Limited, or ASIAL, Mr. Bryan Caires. And Bryan and I have known each other for many years. I'm a member of ASIAL, and I think my private company is now a gold member, so I know ASIAL very well. And they're the premium organisation representing the Australian security industry here in the country. We're going to be looking at, well, I've titled it Politics of Private Security, but really recognising the critical role of frontline security in the frontline security industry. They've obviously copped a bit of slack during COVID, but they are playing an ongoing and a critical role. So we'll have Bryan on very shortly. We'll bring on Bryan Caires, the CEO of ASIAL, the Australian Security Industry Association. Bryan, thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Chris.
Good work. And just for the audience, welcome to Say Good Day, wherever you're listening from. And we're going to cover off, I did title it The Politics of Private Security. So welcome to let us know where you're listening from and what grapples you might have at an industry level. And I just mentioned our security consultant in series, Bryan, our Insight series, and licensing did come up in our discussions. One example is New South Wales is making a Victorian consultant come up to get their photo taken. They won't accept any other way. So these are the kind of crazy things that, drive me mad. But Bryan, for the audience and for the perspective of ASIAL, maybe to introduce the association to the audience. And then we'll move on to your recent study, your Australian Security Industry Licensing Report that came out with some numbers. Okay.
Well, ASIAL is the peak body for security professionals in Australia. We have just over 2,750 members, the majority of which are corporate or organisational members. And the members that we have represent about 85% of the industry in Australia, and that would cover the protective security sector, electronic security sector, and physical security sector. So it's quite a diverse and broad-ranging membership base, from large, medium to smaller size companies.
And you're guided by a board as well. And how many years have you been around? You're celebrating quite a while now.
Well, I've been with the association just over 2 decades, so it's been a while.
Not yourself, but the association itself.
Oh, the association itself? Well, I've been around 20 years of it. 50. The association was set up in '69, so we've just celebrated 50 years.
That's right.
A couple of years ago, so it's been around a while. And each year we slowly but surely are building the size of the association and the services we provide to the industry.
And you mentioned the period of time that you've been with this, so that's a bit scary in itself. And I think when I came into the industry about 15 years ago, I think that's when we first kind of met, and I engaged with ASIAL very early on. A lot has changed in that period, but not a lot from an industry perspective. What's your general observations over that period of time, maybe the last decade? And then that kind of leads into the report of what you've been doing. And I've got this up as a slide, but your general observations of how the industry's gone over the next decade, the last decade, and how it was set up for COVID, particularly being having a critical role.
I think the industry has changed, maybe not as fast as some would like, but there has been change, and it has professionalised. We now have consistent national training standards across each jurisdiction, which, that took many years to achieve. And I think we've seen a professionalisation of the industry in terms of the services that are provided, and also some of the technologies that are now available, which some of them came to light during the pandemic, and the ability of the industry to rapidly change the way it operated so it could actually meet client demand, which changed very, very quickly. So I think there are quite a lot of positives in terms of where the industry has come in the last 2 decades, but absolutely there are some deal breakers that need to be addressed, and we both at the state and the national level we struggle to get resolution of those. But I think everyone agrees where we need to get to. It's just moving the pieces around in the jigsaw to make sure we can actually complete the picture.
Is there anything that stands out to you? It's interesting, I hadn't had that question in mind of, looking back to 10 years and the work that you've been doing, because it is kind of, again, an industry association with a lot of advocacy work there. Should things have been done, or was there a bit of a I told you so moment as the pandemic started rolling out to go, you know, had you been listening to the industry and some of the issues that we're grappling with, and here we are at a national pandemic, that it is problematic now? And I mentioned this consultant, again, as an example. They asked, he needed to do this 2 years ago, but they've kind of delayed it because of COVID. They haven't adapted. The licensing regime has not adapted during COVID to go, oh, well, we'll find new ways. Yeah, what are your thoughts there?
Well, ideally, we would have been in a different situation pre-pandemic. I think if you go back to the Council of Australian Governments back in 2008, agreed to introduce, you know, a consistent national approach to security licensing, but unfortunately that never transpired into anything tangible. So I think if it had happened 10 years ago, we would have been in a better position to respond. But I think what we've seen in probably the last decade is a growing willingness from other agencies to start to engage with the industry, because finally the penny is dropping that, you know, the actual national security relies heavily on the role of the private security industry, with the numbers that are in the industry are significant. So a strong, you know, adaptable and available capability is critical to the overall operation. So I think people are now starting to realize that, but we're still working through the machinations of the different states and territories and the different policy settings to try and get them all to the same point. We managed that with the training competencies, which took a little bit of doing, but we got there in the end. The next you know, elephant in the room is the licensing, which really has to be grappled with once and for all. And it seems to keep being put back into the too hard basket, but we do need to bite that one and bite into it with a big bite and try and address it, because it's not helping people, it's not helping states, it's not helping territories. Yeah,
we will deal with mutual recognition, but maybe let's get a sense of the scale of what we're dealing with. And this is the report from ASIAL. Maybe just talk us into the report, Bryan, in terms of the background. This is the first one I've seen. I know ASIAL's done a number of studies in the past, but yeah, talk us into this.
So this is actually the second one we've done. So what we've tried to do is there's a paucity of information about the size and scope of the industry. So what we've tried to do, and this is drawing on the data from security regulators who actually issue the licenses, is to get quantifiable data on how big the industry is, what year-on-year change there is. And it's interesting, when you look at the numbers, you know, there's 153,000 licensed security personnel. And if you add on top of that the additional staff such as admin, sales staff, marketing staff, you're probably looking at about 180,000 people working in the industry. And there are about 11,000 companies. Now, what's interesting is during the pandemic, numbers actually grew, which to some extent reflects I wouldn't say recession-proof, but the industry, when there is a crisis, the industry is often called upon to fill some of the gaps that are out there. So it has been interesting to look at the stats to see which states have more license holders. So by far, the state of New South Wales has the greatest number of licensed security personnel of about 55,000, and about 5,000 master license or security companies. So we've seen other states grow. WA has grown over the last year. So what we've tried to do is just capture in quantifiable data what the numbers are. And it's interesting, if you add up all of the law enforcement agencies, all of the defence forces, they still do not come to the number of private security personnel. So it is a significant resource and a significant potential force multiplier, which increasingly we're starting to get engagement with different agencies to say, how do we tap into that resource as and when we need it. So I think we're on a slightly different journey now. I think there's a different understanding of the experience and the sophistication in the industry, not just in the protective security side, but also in the electronic side, which provide the cameras, the access control system, the biometric solutions, the alarms, the artificial intelligence are coming in. So there's a whole range of products that the industry offers that everybody, whether it's government, business, homeowners, all rely on. So it's critical that the industries are strong and we have an effective regulatory regime, which unfortunately we don't quite have yet.
There's a comment here from Dean, it's the biggest elephant in the room. So,
Yep.
definitely if you cross on any of the sort of the commentary on socials, the industry has been grappling with this. But again, I think from, we've spoken to sort of ANU, John Blaxland, and, there's a lot of discussion around national resiliency, sort of national security frameworks as well. Is the industry being engaged at that level, not just at government, but in terms of research, things like climate change? There's a security leaders group on climate change. There's a lot of opportunities to engage and really get across the critical importance of the industry.
I think that's starting to happen. I think the idea of sustainability is starting to evolve with the net zero target. So I think we'll start to see people shifting a bit, because that's where the market, that's where we are headed. So people need to get on board that priority. Otherwise, they will be left out in the cold. They won't be able to compete for business. So I think we're already early days with the whole sustainability issue. Is very early on, but I think some of the more enlightened providers are already on that track, and I think that's a sensible track to be on, because that's where we need to be, and we need to engage. So I think we are seeing more and more engagement across a range of areas. I think I mentioned before, the whole crowded places strategy is reliant on private security, and there are a number of other areas. The whole cyber security strategy of the government is reliant on the private sector. So there are things that we need to do to be ready for this, because it's already here, but some companies are still playing catch up.
Now, what are your observations during COVID as well? I noticed, if I brought up those stats that we just did, the master licenses have remained relatively steady, but there's been a 3.9% increase to 153,000 security license holders. Is that, do you think, as a result of COVID and the demand on, say, from quarantine and the like, or just the expanded role? I mean, we saw security officers being moved into, shopping centres and, Coles and Woolworths simply in reaction. What's been your observations during COVID and the impact that it had on frontline personnel and the numbers?
I think what we've seen is certainly a redeployment of a lot of personnel. So, for example, the aviation screening staff were redeployed. Some of the crowd control personnel, obviously there weren't any major mass sporting events or concerts, so some of those were redeployed. Certainly the hotel quarantine did absorb significant numbers, and we've also seen quite a few moving into, temperature checking, screening of people. So there was quite a bit of that. I think what we've experienced is, as we start to come out of the pandemic, the hotel quarantine has sucked out, in some states, say New South Wales, it's several thousand personnel. Now, backfilling that with people has made it difficult. In states like Tasmania, where there's hotel quarantine, it has been an issue to get enough staff to fill existing shifts. Likewise in WA, likewise in South Australia. So there have been some flow-on effects to providers who are now reporting shortages of personnel, significant personnel shortages to actually get people into the industry to fill posts as the economy starts to crank up again. So that will be a challenge for the industry in the next 3 to 6 months, is where are we going to find these people?
Particularly I was going to say, particularly with New South Wales, it's a bit unique because they want to sort of run as per normal as long as they can while running quarantine, whereas the other states tend to shut down, and so you may have that redeployment able to adapt. But do you think there's a little bit of also on those numbers, others that, say you mentioned aviation, hospitality, thought, okay, well, I'll move into security. There was a bit of a demand there, and they've been able to redeploy from other industries and other roles as well that were affected by COVID and lockdowns?
I think there's been a little bit of that, but I think the barrier has been obviously getting your license is not an easy process. So some people have not wanted to go through the cost, whatever it's $1,500 to $2,000 and the time to do that. So some have come across, but I think mainly it's the redeployment of existing personnel, and in many cases the hotel quarantine work has been paying at a higher rate because they need the people, so they're giving guaranteed shifts, and there's a number of benefits that they've been offering, which has made it very hard for other providers to compete to get those people to work for them. So it has created quite an interesting little dynamic within the market, and as we come out, it is proving a little bit tricky. I mean, it's trying to get people to come and work within the industry is going to be the next big challenge. And I think we've done a fair bit of work with the live entertainment sector, and we've actually just written to government, with support of some of the major stadiums around the country who are very concerned about the ability for them to gear up post-pandemic if they cannot get the personnel to work in hospitality and also work as security officers at those events. So they're worried that the bounce back may be stymied by a lack of personnel. So that is something which we've certainly written to government, and we'll have some meetings over the coming weeks to try to work out how do we fill these positions, and where do we get these people from, because we're not the only sector that is short of personnel and struggling to get not just people, but you want good people. So there are trained, there are people, but they're not fit for purpose for the security work. So we don't want just to take whatever's left.
Correct. And one question I had, when you say we've written to government, at what level? Because again, you're a national association in a federated system. How do you engage with government?
At all levels, so state premiers. And
do you have a send all button where just goes everybody?
We target, it depends on the messaging and whether it's relevant, because regulation of the industry is a state issue, but we believe the security issues is a large economic. If you just look at the live entertainment industry, that's about a $38 billion industry, which has shrunk to $12 billion. Now that has huge economic benefits to the country in tourism, restaurants, as well as obviously performers. So it's a massive generator of revenue for the economy. So if they cannot operate because they can't get personnel to man the stadiums and the concert halls, that has a massive economic effect. And security is a fundamental part of that that we are looking to work through. And there's a number of issues, not just the shortage of personnel. There's also issues of people in the crowd control area struggling to get public liability insurance, partly because of the risk profile, and partly it's starting to emerge because of the risk that COVID poses to public liability claims. Because if someone gets infected at a big event and the security officer, it starts to become quite a complicated area. So we're trying to work through the issues to enable these events to start being held again as we work into the summer season, when most of the operators are hoping to get festivals up, getting touring groups coming through, having concerts. So I think it's and I noticed someone raised the issue about subcontracting. Subcontracting is a very big issue. We've just actually developed a subcontracting code of conduct, which is to try and set about best practice guidelines for subcontracting. Subcontracting in itself is not a bad thing, and at times it is needed. But if you're going to subcontract, you have to do it professionally and transparently, so the client knows what is happening, what you're doing, and how you're doing it. So
I think from the industry on the subcontracting, it's you have the good operators. You always have those bad operators. I think it's trying to highlight when they are not following those guidelines. There should be either a price point or a trigger there that licensing divisions are watching for as well. I think this does highlight, in the back of my mind, I had the thoughts on during COVID in Melbourne in the first sort of outbreak there, security really copped it in terms of the inquiry, and I think here we are 12, 18 months later, and people appreciate the poor standards, and it wasn't necessarily that frontline officers fault. It was more of a system breakdown. What's your observations or the outcomes from that? Do you think, are you still dealing with the outcomes from those inquiries and what initially happened in Victoria and how the industry was received or kind of copped a lot of flack on it and was actually that I had the perception that it was actually made out to be had copped the blame for it?
Well, the industry's often doesn't always do the right thing, but it's often used as a little bit of a scapegoat. And I think if you look at the states, say like New South Wales, WA, South Australia, who have worked with private security in their hotel quarantine for the last year, if you get the control, command and coordination correct, there's no reason why you can't run an effective program. I think what that inquiry into the hotel quarantine program in Victoria found was there was 7 different agencies and no one took control. I mean, it was probably not as well thought through as it could have been, and I think as a result there were unintended consequences which had a very negative impact, not just on the industry, but obviously people died, which was horrific. So I think what we need to look at is, with any of these programs, you do need to think it through. Now, that was put together very quickly at the end of February, March last year. But having said that, I mean, Victoria's had probably 3 iterations now of their quarantine program. So, but if you look at the New South Wales model, they have put in place a fairly robust model of governance, compliance, and they have gone through improvements over time. So I think to put all the blame at the industry is a little bit harsh. Certainly the procurement methodology maybe left something to be desired. And I think that's something that we've seen with that subcontracting code of conduct, is we're calling for government and the corporate procurement to do proper due diligence, actually, do the research to see who is actually going to come and provide the work, what expertise do they have, who are the personnel that's going to actually be on the ground, and do they have the employees? If they've got no employees, what are you actually engaging? Is it just a reseller? So we have to look at, you got to look at your homework, and at some points when there is surge demand, there may be a need to subcontract. That may be inevitable, but at the very outset of your contract, you need to ask those questions. And I think what we're seeing is some companies just look for the lowest price, which you often don't get the best solution. And in the long term, it comes back to bite you, because things don't go to plan.
Now you're talking. It sounds like you're talking to the end user there.
Absolutely. Certainly with the provider. I mean, it's not just all the end users, but they can hold the providers to account by actually holding them to a higher standard. Certainly from the provider's point of view, they need to be accountable, and they need to be fully transparent, so the client knows what's going on. And if they fail to do that, then the client should act.
Where do you think that a good hook is for that type of approach, where you mentioned codes of conduct, there's guidelines? Is there sort of a legislative protection from the industry or anything that you advocate at that level, so it does put the onus on the end user and the client to make sure, particularly like say even just local government at a state government level? There's some recent guidelines out recently on pricing of security as well.
Well, I know there's certainly some work going on at federal government level in terms of procurement, with relating to certain types of security activities. I think, as
in defence and that type of thing.
This is through the Home Affairs area. So I think the idea is that putting out best practice guidelines is the way to make people just understand what it is they're buying. Because if you don't, I think when you make it compulsory, it makes it a bit more difficult. Ideally, people would do everything the right way all the time, but sometimes different imperatives get brought to the fore, and pricing is always going to be an issue. But I think the industry will not improve unless the clients expect better and ask for better and actually do their homework, because at the moment, not all of them do their homework. And it isn't just about the clients. Certainly the providers have to lift their act. But some of them cannot compete against some of the providers are out there that their margins are ridiculously low. There's no way they can actually provide the service legally and pay in accordance with the award, and yet they win contracts, which people are scratching their heads. How did they do that?
Well, is that not then the role of the SLEDs, the Security Licensing Enforcement Divisions, to make sure that they're doing the auditing, that they're doing the checking and the profile checking in terms of the background of the directors and the like? Do you feel that they're doing enough? Are they underfunded? Are they a bit complacent in the, well, we'll just deal with the legislation that we're given and, you know, take it up with higher authorities?
Well, there's a range of agencies, and they would, the regulators would probably articulate that it's the Fair Work Ombudsman's role to make sure there's compliance with award payments. So certainly we have an MOU with Fair Work, and we do work with them, and we've initiated some, compliance programs. It's just hard to keep up. There's so many different providers that they can't keep up. But I think that's why as much as we can push from the bottom to raise standards, if clients don't demand better, we're pushing uphill. It's very, very difficult. So I think we have to come at it from both the top and the bottom, and hopefully we can meet somewhere in the middle and gradually, push the standard up over time. It's not going to happen quickly.
Well, at least Fair Work is a federal agency, as you say. You can have an MOU with them, and you're touching all touch points across the country. In fact, I noticed there was action brought up against a Perth company recently, came up on the news as well. Now, the real bugbear here, and Dean is obviously passionate, it's one of those things that I used to be so passionate about this area, used to make me insane, and Bryan, you know that, is the mutual recognition. And maybe what's the status here from your perspective and the industry's perspective of what this amendment bill is happening?
Well, the automatic mutual recognition is scheduled to come into effect from 1 July. However, states and territories can apply to seek an exemption from the Act, and it is our understanding that a number of the jurisdictions will be seeking exemption from the Automatic Mutual Recognition Act on the grounds of public safety, which will, in effect, make it unlikely that any regulator will enable people to have automatic mutual recognition for security licensing, which is disappointing. ASIAL's position is, in principle, we think automatic mutual recognition is a good thing. However, we do appreciate that there are current public safety issues because there are inconsistencies that currently exist with current legislative requirements. So our view is, if we all agree that AMR is a good idea, why don't we focus on working on a timetable to address those inconsistencies? For example, some jurisdictions use criminal intelligence, which is active criminal intelligence to keep unsavory elements out, where others do not. Our view is criminal intelligence should be used. Some jurisdictions do not allow student or working holiday visas to get a license. Others do. We support the working holiday visas and student visa holders to not be able to get a license. We support that. So we're trying to raise the bar to some extent for those entering the industry to make sure that only fit and proper people who are going to be here for a while, who are going to be long-term protecting our critical infrastructure. So we support all of that. So we are aiming for a higher standard of security officer, but the challenge we have is getting every single state and territory to the same point in the journey. But I think with AMR, we're resigned to the fact that it's not going to get up from 1 July because the states will claim there's a public safety risk. Do
you know what's the basis of the public safety view? Is it anything to do with public safety? I mean, what other industries are going to go through? Is it the electricians going to go through?
Well, it's hard to know because I think a lot of jurisdictions, whether it's real estate, in principle, they all like the idea as long as it's one way. So, they don't want hordes of, what they don't want is hordes of people, for example, in Queensland, rushing up from New South Wales to become real estate agents. And then when the market dies, they all rush back to New South Wales. So there's a little bit of parochialism in there, but right. I think certainly the public safety element is the states with higher levels of security licensing are concerned that you will have a flood of people from lower requirement states getting licensed and then rushing back into their state, which will then undermine their system, which I understand. So our view is, if we all agree that AMR is a good idea, let's now work on a timetable to say, let's address those shortcomings over a period of time and work through them so we can arrive at a solution that is, sensible, because it doesn't make sense for someone who has a national client, maybe a small company. If you've got one client who's national, you've got to hold 8 different licenses. And you can't use the probity check that you use or fingerprint in one state because the other state doesn't accept it. So you then have to fly to that state to be fingerprinted, and then you've got to go back again. And you're not a criminal. You're trying to do the right thing. So our view is, if there are concerns, let's get everybody up to the same standard, and then people can move freely between states.
Bryan, where's the, and this is why I call it the politics of private security, and it's not just us, there are other sectors there, but just that type of example where they put a barrier there. They know it's a barrier in terms of cost. I think fingerprints is a perfect example. Where does it stop at where do the politics come into play? I can understand Queensland not wanting a bunch of real estate agents to come up to from New South Wales when the property market's hot, and then impact their local community, protecting their state. I would have thought it'd go the other way. Wanting an exemption. The exemption should be for public safety and national security. This applies. We do want our security services to be able to move around as required for public safety. Not it's public safety because we don't trust them over there.
Yeah.
That doesn't.
I think it's almost like a conflicting thing. Public safety is being used as an issue not to do it. Yeah. Because the concerns that each state has, some have better than others, but from our perspective, public safety is the risk because there are these inconsistencies. So it's like it's a little dichotomy that we're saying is public safety.
But just from your perspective, where is the politics there? Like, at what level does this stop? Is it at a political party level, or is it a certain minister level across the governments, or is this the way that the federation is designed, where there's always going to be a sort of a touch point where we go, nah, we're not crossing that line and we want our state independence? Well,
the thing is, the position is very logical. I mean, ASIAL's had this broad position since, I think, 1996, that we need nationally consistent licensing standards. If you look at the railways, I think, took 100 years to get them onto the same gauge, and that was a pretty logical thing as well. So I think it's something which, we met recently with Home Affairs. We want to see the Home Affairs try and drive the leadership. Unfortunately, COAG got to the point of saying this is a good idea, but now COAG has been replaced by National Cabinet. The National Cabinet is more interested in, understandably, over COVID and other related issues. But we would like to see this as an issue that it is a national security issue. And if you look, for example, in 2032, when the Olympic Games most likely come to Australia again, there will be a large demand for private security personnel, and they will not all be in one state. So we will have to see people move around, as we did with the Commonwealth Games. And we need to have a workforce that can move, whether it's a disaster, whether it's something else. We need to have this resource that's all trained to the same standard, all licensed to the same standard, who then become a very useful resource for all levels of government, all levels of the corporate sector. But until we actually, just address the elephant in the room, but no one seems to have the appetite to do it. So we will start pushing, and I have continued to push federal government to try and play a leadership role, but there's nothing in it for some of the states to do that because, they're more worried about their own state or territory interests. So I think we'll get there eventually, but it's for us, AMR is a potential catalyst for change because, someone, working and living on the border between New South Wales and New South Wales and Queensland, or New South Wales and Victoria, to go over an invisible line and then have to have another license to do exactly the same thing doesn't make a lot of sense. So,
particularly if you're a security consultant and an investigator, because the investigation sector is also regulated in the same way. So you need 21 different licenses to be an independent security consultant and investigator, which I was. I tried to be. You can only do 2 states and you run out of money. You can't keep flying around the country just to get fingerprinted.
And it's unnecessary red tape, which really does not add any value to anything. So, I mean, our view is, and that's where we believe the feds need to come in, is let's have a national database. So, you know, you're not going to 7 different or 8 different jurisdictions, and that can be fed in from the states into a centralized database. So it is achievable if you know, if we can send people to the moon, we must be able to address this issue, but there needs to be the appetite. And what we don't really want to see is some catastrophic event happen that people realize, you know what, we should do this. That would be the worst. You know, it would be effective, but we'd rather not go down that track where something terrible has to happen before something is done. But I think certainly government knows this is what they need to do. It's just whether there's the appetite for somebody to take this one on.
We're aligned. Where are you aligned? And I think we could literally talk about it for another hour. Where are you aligned on the cybersecurity sector as well? Because do you find that that's a potential tool, particularly when we're talking critical infrastructure now, the new amendments to the Critical Infrastructure Act on cyber? Do you find that that's one that you need to align to better?
Well, I think just in terms of cyber, I mean, it's ironic that a cyber security professional has no probity checks or anything. And again, that's something that we have flagged with regulators, that as a minimum, there should be some probity checking requirement. Competencies get a bit more complicated because the cyberspace, there's quite a lot of certification programs, but certainly from an industry point of view, you can do a lot more damage through the virtual world than you can the physical world, and yet you can operate carte blanche on that one. So I think we're seeing, because a lot of the products now that are coming out from the electronic sector are sitting on networks, so we're seeing a greater convergence of a lot of those technologies. So the skill sets have to be upskilled to be able to basically migrate. A lot of products are moving into, you know, the use of AI and you know, machine learning. It's all being embedded in everything. So I think that's something which the industry is certainly migrating more and more towards, and you'll see the whole idea of, you know, digital transformation is happening within security.
Can I be not so much critical, but maybe if you're self-reflective, do you think ASIAL has been enough on the front foot in the past and seeing this coming? What else can it do, and how maybe is it adapting? We'll touch on the board shortly. Got a new board, but do you think given the critical role, but this is part of this interview, was really highlighting the critical role of frontline security, and that includes not just personnel but electronics, and now, you know, and cyber is frontline as well. Where do you think ASIAL? Do you think ASIAL's done enough, or do you think you are adapting your strategy now, thinking, well, hang on, you know, this is a big issue. It's rather than just one association, but you've been around for 50 years. You know, there's been a change along the way. So maybe a bit more self-reflective, maybe not critical, but yeah, where do you think you might be changing or adapting to the engagement, particularly with government?
There's certainly there's a lot of big issues that the industry has to grapple with and have grappled with, but I think what we've seen is certainly over time our position has changed and is evolving. I think we've actually got a report coming out in the next couple of months, which is looking at the 2025 and where does the industry need to be at, and how does it start getting prepared now for 2025. And the aim of that report is to look at developing a roadmap for providers to start thinking about what are the existential threats that they face, not just now, but in 3 to 5 years' time. And they need to start thinking about that, because otherwise they will become, they'll become bit players. They'll be just off into the sidelines. So I suppose what we're trying to do is set down a bit of a narrative for some of them to follow, to say, well, look, we're here, and we probably need to be there in 3 or 4, 5 years' time. How do we actually get there? So what we've engaged, the Australian Security Research Centre to put together. Is
it the Horizon report?
Yeah, the Horizon report, to basically look at, what are the things that people need to be thinking about now to be ready for 3 to 5 years' time, because what we're seeing is the speed of the rate of change and the speed of change is getting faster and faster, and not everybody can keep up.
No, and this is why part of what I do here is we're just trying to keep up. You can see in what we've got coming up on Friday out of the research and here in Australia, things like night vision and sort of the data analytics is getting extremely clever with implications. Do you think ASIAL and the association is publicly known enough? You do your public engagement and awareness, but I do find it sometimes it's related to things like home security. Do you find that ASIAL, or do you feel that ASIAL will be more out on the national landscape in terms of these bigger discussions?
I think it's a hard one. The media are not particularly interested in what the industry does, right? So it just takes it for granted it's going to be there.
Yeah.
So trying to get we tend to get approached when there's something bad has happened. So the hotel is a great example. So I think the challenge for the industry is to actually explain, and it's a big challenge, what it actually does. And it is quite a significant resource base for businesses and government, which is often a little bit underappreciated in terms of the scope of what it does. So that is a challenge. I mean, we have sought to try and raise that awareness, but it's not as easy as it sounds. But I think that is the endeavour for us, certainly the next 2 to 3 years, is not to raise ASIAL's profile as such, is more to raise the industry's profile towards the lots of positive things that it does. And what we're seeing probably more than we have before is, law enforcement agency. We've done a lot of work recently with the, police, fire, and ambulance, the communications area, about the, the rollout of telematic vehicles and the, with more and more vehicles reporting in, how do police interface with the role that the industry. So we've developed protocols. We're seeing much more engagement between law enforcement and the industry, which is a positive step. 20 years ago, it was very much an us and them. Now we're starting to see a little greater alignment.
I think not so much from a member's perspective, but from an industry, and again, how I see not just ASIAL and the work that you do, but things like, those national wins that you have, national alarm response, guidelines, and everything that you find national, tick, 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 really have that out in front, because I think that starts to build the work. I find the frustrated members, a bit like what I was a few years ago, until you really understand the intricacies and the nuances in the work and the industry, just to build those, because it is a very difficult role I've come to appreciate that ASIAL has, trying to shift change, because the big stick doesn't work, the yelling and screaming, jumping up and down doesn't work, but sometimes nor does the polite diplomatic engagement's too slow. So
it's probably a combination of all of those things. But I mean, I suppose what we're slowly trying to do is professionalise the industry.
Yeah.
And we have limitations. We're not a huge. There's 10 of us. It's not a massive corporation. But again, we do try through a number of different channels to build connections. And I think slowly but surely. I mean, it'd be nice to be a lot faster. But I think that's where, when we come back to the industry, there's about 11,000 security companies out there. We've got just under 3,000. That means there's 8,000 floating around. They could be contributing to their industry, and they need to get involved if they really are committed to higher standards. Join an industry body, whether it's us or somebody else. Get involved, because you're not going to get change by just sitting on your own. But slowly we're getting there. But there have been some wins, but getting people to understand what those wins mean is not always easy, but yeah.
Yeah, I think you've nailed it there in terms of the industry has to also represent itself. So if you're not doing anything, if you're not a member of an association, or even just networking in the industry, then you're probably not taking it as seriously as you should for the long term. And it was a big takeaway from our Security Consultant Insight series, that one of the takeaways was engage with the industry and network and understand what your colleagues are going through as well. Now, I suppose this is a really good segue on this, in terms of, if you want to appreciate the size and scale and the technology within the industry now, is for a smarter change world, elevated intelligence. And we have seen COVID playing a part. It's playing a part this week, very week, here in Sydney with CCTV tracking people through a major shopping centre during an initial outbreak of COVID-19. So definitely we've seen it in the video sector. Bryan, maybe talk us through the conference. This is the Security Exhibition and Conference, and ASIAL is running the conference.
Yeah, the conference program is primarily aimed at the users of security services. We've got quite a diverse range of presentations, from sessions on cybersecurity through to we've got Toby Walsh talking on artificial intelligence and where that's headed. We've got someone from the New South Wales Premier's Department talking about the lessons learnt from the quarantine hotel scheme. We've got people talking about security in a post-COVID world. So the presenters we've got is quite a dynamic mix of people from industry, not providers of security, but a lot of experienced professionals who the intention is to make it as practical as possible. So people come away with maybe 2 or 3 things that they can take back to their business and actually apply, rather than a theoretical talk fest. The idea is it becomes a much more practical driven security practitioner event. Typically we get about 200 people come along to the conference over the 2 days, and it runs obviously alongside the exhibition, which when you walk around the show you do get a sense of the scope and diversity, and there's some of the very smart technologies that are out there. And this year, for the first time, we're also co-locating the event with the Integrate, the audiovisual show. So I think overall we're expecting about 10,000 people to come through and basically start to get back in there and see some of the innovative products that are out there. But we also, the conference program is priced at hopefully a cost competitive rate. It's not like the commercial conference companies of the $3,000. It's it starts at about $700 or $800. So it's not certainly not free, but it's certainly not up with the $3,000 for 2 days. And it has been developed by practitioners for practitioners. So
yeah, very good. We'll be there. We've got a stand. I think we're at M28 on the floor this year. And pleased to be media partners as well with Security Exhibition and Conference. So that's 21 and 23 of July, pretty much this time next month. And then hot on the heels of that, losing my slides today, that's not working, is International Security Officers Day. So this is 24th of July, literally on the back of the conference and exhibition.
That's right. It's a day that's been going for a while. We've given it a bit more of a push this year. So that's simply a day, 24/7, 24 July, to basically thank the role of security officers. So when you see a security officer, maybe just say that thank you for the work they do. So that's a very simple concept. It's operated now in about 8 or 9 countries. The intention is to eventually make it a UN, gazetted day. But it's certainly got a lot more interest this year. We've got a range of collateral that people can download for free. And post in their little meal rooms to thank the security officer. We've got some little badges like the one I'm wearing now, where which basically people can purchase and give to their security officers. So it's a pretty simple concept. It's really just acknowledging security officers and thanking them for the work they do. So anyone can get involved.
I think it's just asial.com.au at ISOD.
Yep.
And again, as Bryan mentioned, there's a range of collateral, and that's the logo. So it's a good opportunity to, if you see a security officer in the street, particularly on 24/7, just appreciate the work that they do. And on this particular day, it's their day of recognition. And I love that date is great. George Chin, I think, originally came up with that on 24/7 because that's what security operates on. So we'll be supporting that one. And then that brings us to the industry awards, and this is another good thing. So slowly, I'm seeing things that I'm liking. This is bringing the ASIAL's Awards for Excellence, the Outstanding Security Performance Awards, OSPAs, and the Australian Security Medals Foundation together. You did this last, I think, 2019, the 3.
Last year we didn't do it.
So doing it again this year.
So again, the concept is pretty simple. We bring everybody under one umbrella. There are 3 different award programs. They're all slightly different focus, but again, it's just to recognise there are over, I think, 20 categories of awards. All that information is available on our website, and that will take you to the other award programs categories. And the aim is basically to recognise all the good work and good people that are working in our industry, and just acknowledge them. So it's the nominations open on 1 July, so in the next week or so, and the awards will be presented in Sydney on the 27th of October. So again, it's an important opportunity for the industry as a whole. Members and non-members can participate. There's no barriers. All are welcome.
Very good, and that's hashtag Security Awards. And again, we're media partners to that. So we'll support ASIAL and the work that you're doing as much as we possibly can. And again, it's one of those important roles that the industry has along with the other associations. So look, Bryan, thank you so much for your time. You've been very generous today, almost for the full hour. There's no more chats or comments. There was one, good on you, Dean, for providing that commentary along the way. There's another one here on need not accept $20 an hour from the security officers. They've got to get that pay rise and should be much more than $20 an hour. Geez, that's way too low. But thank you, Bryan. We will release this out as a podcast and an edited interview. But otherwise, we've been joined by Bryan Caires, the Chief Executive Officer with the Australian Security Industry Association. Bryan, I'll let you go. I'll put you backstage, and thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Good on you, mate. Cheers.
Yep.